everyone again. Thank you for the hardy souls that made it on time. Some of you also travelling from Brussels, so we do appreciate you getting up nice and early this morning. For those of you who maybe have not seen me already, I'm Aminda Lee, and I will be moderating this plenary discussion, and I will also be moderating another couple of panels later on. And I'd like to welcome you to this third and final day, gosh, can you believe we're already on the third day, of the Open Food Conference organised by Departments of Agriculture, Fisheries, Health and Economy and Innovation in the Government of Flanders. I hope those of you who went on the cultural visit yesterday to Park Abbey Heritage Site enjoyed it. There were some amazing things we saw. It was a bit of a rush, but we got a flavour. And now let's concentrate on today's discussions. We've got a packed programme ahead with 3 sets of thematic sessions running in parallel as the other 2 days. And one thing to note, a very important thing to note, the conclusion session will not be lasting an hour, but only half an hour, which means that you will be able to leave earlier. The conference will be finishing at 5:45. So hopefully that's appreciated, particularly for those of you who've come nice and early. A reminder of a few practical points here. Details of the programme are on the screens outside, also on your badges. And you can also access everything via the website, including the speakers' biographies. For any queries, go to the info desk. They can always help you with any inquiry. Please make sure your devices are on silent. Everyone's been very good so far, so please make sure that's the case. And the event hashtag for social media sharing is Open Food Conference. Now, today's opening plenary is going to be exploring resilient food economies and connecting farmers and citizens. We're going to have keynote and opening speeches, followed by a debate on the topic, with experts bringing different perspectives on the issue. And I'm going to start with our keynote speech, given by Alan Matthews, Professor Emeritus of European Agricultural Policy in the Department of Economics at Trinity College, Dublin. Among other things, he's going to give us a picture of the current state of play across Europe in terms of subsidies and productivity, while also looking at how to connect farmers and citizens, especially on the sustainability topic. Alan Matthews, the stage is now yours. Please give him a warm welcome.
Good morning, everybody, and it's a difficult slot to fill on the third day of a conference where we've already had 2 days of really interesting discussions. So I just thank the organisers for this opportunity to try to pull together a few of the ideas which occurred to me when I was asked to address this topic of resilient food economies. And of course, we live in a world of uncertainty, whether it's war in Europe or in the Middle East, whether it's disruptions to supply chains, whether it's trade restrictions and potential trade wars, whether it's climate extremes. And this topic of resilient food economies, I want to sort of broaden it a little bit to include at least these 3 elements. So productivity, we want our food system to produce sufficient food efficiently and providing a decent livelihood to those involved in the sector. We want it to be sustainable, to produce within the planetary boundaries and to conserve natural resources. And in the narrow sense of resilience, we want it to be robust to crises and to shocks. And I want to start with this productivity issue. And here we have a picture of the structural adjustment that has been occurring within the farm sector. The left-hand side is agriculture, and it shows the share of agriculture in both employment, that's the blue line, and in value added. So, and on the right-hand side is just a longer time series. It's agriculture including forestry and fisheries, but the trend is exactly the same. And what I want to highlight is the gap. So basically, what we observe is we have many more people, a larger share of people working in the sector than their share of national output. And that is, for us, a signal, a sign of a productivity gap. And where you have a productivity gap, you have an income gap. And of course, it's that income gap that has been driving this structural adjustment. If we look at the same story, but from a slightly different angle, I have three series on this chart here. The black line at the top, that is the growth in real average wages and salaries in the rest of the economy. In a sense, it's what farmers are competing against in terms of opportunity cost. You'll see there's been steady growth, except in the last 3 or 4 years since Corona, and then more recently, the high rate of inflation has simply eroded real earnings. Then with the red line, you can see that we've also seen significant growth in real agricultural incomes per agricultural work unit, so per head. And you can also see that the gap has been closing. So at the beginning of the period, agricultural income per head was about 40% of the EU average wages and salaries. At the end of the period, it's around 60%. So there's still a gap, but it has been narrowing. But the important point is how that narrowing of the gap has occurred. And only about 20% of the closing of that gap has arisen because of an increase in the overall value of agricultural production. And 80% of the gap has been closed because we've seen a reduction in the farm labor force, and that's what the yellow line is showing us. Now, we need to be a little bit careful when we look at EU-wide statistics because they can be a little bit biased. We know that the large share of the agricultural workforce is in countries where average incomes are relatively low, both farm and non-farm, and much of the agricultural production is in countries where average incomes are much higher. And you can see this just briefly. We see in terms of the number of holdings that actually 45% of all holdings in the EU are in just 2 countries, Romania and Poland, both of which would have, relatively lower incomes than for example, in the Western European countries. But even if we look at a country level rather than the EU level, we do see exactly the same trends. But the gap is not so significant. In Belgium, it's probably around an 80% gap, for example. But we do see the gap closing, but a productivity and therefore an income gap remaining. The other point I want to highlight is the heterogeneity within the farming sector. So we often, we know that the agricultural census in 2020 told us that there were 9 million holdings in the European Union. 2/3 of those are under 5 hectares in size. Now, some of those indeed are very intensive horticultural farms. We heard about one in one of the sessions yesterday just outside Leuven. But in many cases, it's hard to see these as professional farms. They're maybe semi-subsistence farms, very important for those who run them, but not necessarily making a significant contribution to the European food supply. There's 9 million holdings, there's 6 million beneficiaries of CAP payments. And then if we look at the Farm Accountancy Data Network, which is really our only source to explore the distribution of income within the farm sector, that is confined to commercial farms, and it represents, it's a sample of course, but it represents just over 2.5 million farms. So you go from 9 million holdings to 2.5. But if we look at that Fadden sample, and I just highlighted the 2 columns on the left, we see that if we look at the biggest 2 size groups, so this is dividing it into 6 size groups in the sample. The 2 biggest size groups account for just under 20% of the holdings in the sample, but they actually produce 77% of total European food output. Okay? And if you look at the incomes, which is the 3rd numerical column, the incomes in those farms are actually pretty decent. Okay? Of course, we need to take account there should be a return to land and to capital as well as to labor, but nonetheless, pretty decent. But if you look then at the majority of farms, so in other words, the 80% of farms in the smaller 4 size groups, you can see that incomes are simply not adequate at all. Of course, we know that on many of these farms there will be off-farm income, there will be pluri-activity. Farm households don't rely only on their agricultural income. But in terms of productivity, in terms of the return to the labor on those farms, these farms are simply not making an adequate return. We do, of course, provide direct payments to agriculture, and we all know that these payments are skewed very heavily towards the larger farms, those farms that we've seen where incomes are already probably more or less adequate. But what perhaps is often overlooked is that if we look at the relative importance of those direct payments, they're actually much more important to the smaller farms. Okay, so actually the smaller farms depend much more heavily, even though the absolute amount of payments going to the larger farms is larger. It's actually, they're more important to the smaller farms. So how do we actually address this productivity challenge? And in my view, farm consolidation will necessarily continue. We've seen a halving of the number of holdings in the last 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised that we will see a further halving in the next 20 years. We need, of course, to invest much more in research and knowledge exchange, relatively small share of CAP resources going into that at the present time. But it's not only the quantity, it's also the direction of research. We need much more innovation addressing the potential trade-offs between productivity and sustainability to provide farmers with a much wider range of options which will allow them to see synergies and not just trade-offs. We need to encourage generational renewal. It's been referred to in a number of sessions in the conference so far. And here I would highlight the potential of maybe looking at whether it makes sense to continue to provide direct payments to farmers who, in their national systems, are already receiving retirement pensions. Does that really make sense in terms of being an active farmer? We need, of course, to support and embrace the digital revolution and to address regulatory constraints to innovation. And here I am thinking of the proposal on new breeding techniques, which was approved by the Parliament, but is still waiting for approval in the Council, and whether we get that or not is an open question. Turning then to the second element of this resilient food systems, which is the drive towards sustainability, I do want to emphasize that the new CAP did make significant changes in that direction. And just to give you sort of one figure, if we look at the previous CAP, around 2/3 of the total CAP budget was going towards area-based payments, passive payments, not really requiring farmers to change their behavior. That share in the new CAP is down to 50%. So incremental progress, but nonetheless an important change. In addition, of course, to the CAP, we've had regulatory initiatives under the European Green Deal. I see these as divided into two categories. We've had the legislation directed at decarbonisation of the energy and industry sectors, which I think has been remarkably successful. Nearly all of that legislation has been passed. I think we're still waiting for the Energy Taxation Directive to be approved. But then when we look at the agriculture and land sector, which was embraced by the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies, we see a rather different picture. It's clear that that regulatory reform agenda has run into headwinds. And if you look at the, if you like, progress or lack of progress on the legislative initiatives which were set out in these two strategies, probably only 1/3 of these have actually seen or are likely to see the light of day. I think one of the issues which was actually not addressed in the farm to fork strategy, so we can say that it hasn't been implemented because it simply was a missing element, and that really is the future for animal agriculture. It's kind of a, to mix metaphors, an elephant in the room, because I've listened to nearly all of the sessions today, at least this week, have recognized that in Europe, we do need to reduce our consumption of animal-sourced foods. But the corollary of that is going to imply changes in what farmers produce and how they use their land, really has not been taken, in my view, sufficiently seriously. I mean, there are interesting issues. If we want to reduce meat consumption, should we be putting the emphasis on red meat or on white meat? And there's pros and cons to that debate. What about the future role of alternative proteins? We discussed that earlier in the conference. But I do think we need to focus much more on the implications for livestock farmers when thinking about this important issue of dietary change. So pursuing the sustainability agenda and looking in the sense of what lessons we might learn from the sort of pushback on the regulatory side we've seen in the last 12 months, We clearly need to engage in communication on the implications of reform, and I do think the criticism that the proposals probably were not accompanied by an impact assessment, at least a published one, there's validity to that, and we need to be careful, for example, looking at the rather significant 2040 climate target that the Commission recently proposed, that we do a proper impact assessment of the likely impact of that on the agricultural sector. That hasn't occurred up to now. We need to pay attention to the losers from the reform. It's interesting that the polluter pays principle, which is actually written into the EU treaties, is often suspended when it comes to farming. So when we ask farmers to reduce their environmental footprint, some of the negative impacts on the environment, whether it's water quality, biodiversity loss, ammonia emissions, and so on, the answer often comes back, well, yes, but we need money to help us to do this. And indeed, it is the case that, you know, to be green, we can't be in the red, is the phrase we often hear. And it is a political decision whether we want to support farmers in this transition, but it was clearly evident that there was no additional funding to these reform proposals, and whether we need to look in the next iteration at some role for transitional payments to sort of de-risk this transition. We also know that ecological reform requires detailed monitoring and verification, and that has been an issue. Since I prepared the talk, the Commission has put forward this proposal for simplification, and I'm sure Catherine will probably talk a little bit about that later. And of course, there is the strategic dialogue, and we're going to hear from Professor Stroh-Snyder later on that. Just on the consumer side, I do think that sustainable food is going to be more costly. It's not necessarily the case because as we address some of these environmental externalities, we can have win-win solutions where actually it benefits the farmer's bottom line. But many of the things that we're asking farmers to do, and indeed the rest of the food chain, are going to add costs to food. Even from the health point of view, if we look at healthy diets, so not the environmental side, nutrient-rich foods are more expensive on average to produce, more expensive to purchase compared to staples and ultra-processed foods. We know that the cheapest calories come from fast food, so if we want to shift consumers to more healthy diets, again, that potentially is going to be more expensive. Of course, if you consume fewer animal products, if we reduce food waste, we can decrease the food budget. But on the other hand, increased consumption of these more sustainable qualities is likely to add to it. And it is interesting that in the most recent advice that was given to the Commission from its group of chief scientific advisors on sustainable food consumption, they looked at the various options to try to shift consumption habits, and they concluded that there's clear evidence that direct measures are effective. This includes sugar taxes, meat taxes, and pricing products according to their environmental impacts, as well as lower taxes on healthy and sustainable alternatives. So the use of the pricing mechanism, obviously it's something which governments are very reluctant to embrace, particularly in the context where we've seen an increase in food prices of actually probably around 30% over the last 2 years across Europe. Is it sufficient to look at these potential flanking measures, you know, the subsidization of healthier foods, targeted income support for vulnerable households? I think these are issues which we need to discuss in greater detail. So finally then, in terms of food system resilience, of course, we are increasingly aware that our food supply chains are vulnerable to different types of threats. But on the other hand, I think it has demonstrated a significant capacity to respond to disruption, particularly in the case of COVID, but also in the other shocks that we've experienced recently. There's clearly a vital role for communications networks, and here I would highlight the importance of the European Food Security Crisis Preparedness and Response Mechanism, the Commission's market observatories, and most recently the Critical Entities Resilience Directive, which will have implications for the food industry. Not only food processors, but also wholesaling and logistics, who will be required to undertake a regular risk assessment of their supply chains. Of course, we know that redundancy and flexibility would improve the stability of supply chains, but we also know that they have a cost. Let me skip that, and let me just talk, this is my final slide. Of course, when we look at the resilience of food supply chains, there is a very close link with the resilience of food systems as a whole. So that sustainability agenda that we talked about earlier. The role of trade is important. We know that trade can be a conductor for shocks, price shocks from the world market, but it also has important risk pooling properties. So, for example, if we were to rely entirely on domestic production, the potential risks to that are actually greater than relying on the world market. You're more likely to be able to balance off shocks on the world market because it's simply a larger market. The role of trade agreements, we often see these in a sort of negative sense because we look at the competitive impact, but potentially trade agreements can also improve our food security because they actually do link us to important suppliers of imports. For example, fruit and vegetables, where we are still a significant net deficit. We've discussed in the conference already the role of food reserves. Whether we certainly should look at this issue, whether this should be in the form of public stocks, whether, for example, we can encourage households to increase their household reserves. Is that the right way to go? I think we need to look at that issue in some greater detail. But my bottom line in terms of the resilience issue is that food insecurity in the EU is really caused more by problems of access to food, and it's especially a poverty, a lack of income problem, rather than limited availability at this point in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting, lots of interesting figures there, lots of things we could discuss, and we will be discussing in our panel debate coming up in a short while. But now we're going to hear from the farming perspective, and we're going to hear from Chris Harbot from the Circular Farm Harbot. He's here today to tell us a little bit about innovation in farming, among other things. For those of you who were at the food market on Monday night, you might have tried his algae products, including salami, which was very delicious, I must say. So please come up and tell us a little bit more. Give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm very happy to see so many people here this morning, especially the people who are early here. I personally know how challenging it can be to be in time, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak here. So I will check, yeah. So I'm Chris Harbot from Harbot Agriculture, born a farmer. I'm convinced that we can create balance between nature and agriculture. So what we do in the farm to adapt to global warming is actually, in the middle you see a multi-variety sward where we grow grasses and herbs together with clover and alfalfa. To avoid major nitrogen leaks in the production of feed for the cows. And on the right side you see wheat, but now we cultivate cereals for the bakery shop, so for consumers directly and not for our cows anymore. And on the other side you see where my wife and I are in the middle of hemp, because we make innovative crop rotations of wheat and hemp and other plants, because the hemp then is a lever to an income, because we sell the fiber to building companies, and this is important for them to decrease the carbon footprint of the building. A big part of the milk of our cows is delivered to the biggest dairy cooperative in Belgium, which is Milkobel. 1,700 farmers deliver milk. 1,800 people work, are the staff of this company. Now, how we try to mitigate for climate is we have our cows. Even in summer, we have them 16 hours a day in the shed because there we can collect the manure to process it in an anaerobic digestion. But we also have them all summer, every day, 8 hours a day in meadow. Many reasons for that, of course, but also a cow will slightly produce less methane while being in the meadow, and also animals in the meadow do not produce ammonia. They're not responsible for ammonia production, which is important as well. But of course we try to do even more, and we have this PBR for microalgae production, because we now have 26 layers of microalgae in tubes on top of each other, which means less land use for production of a plant that has almost 50% of protein content. But it's a closed system, so we have no water evaporation. Therefore, it's very sustainable in water use as well. And actually, if you visit farms, you will see the more farms you visit, the more new things you will see. Farms try to innovate. Farmers are very creative, and there's a good reason for them to trying to be creative because global warming is a big challenge, and farmers are the first ones who have to find solutions. So we've been supported for innovations. We also worked in an Interact project where we tried to create better value chains for microalgae as a novel protein source. We need many novel protein sources to make an autonomic food system in Europe. And here you see, connecting with partners in the chain is very important. We also been supported in EIP. We had an operational group on, the name was Grass to Algae. So we make grass juice and take this as a biofertilizer for the microalgae. And this is an extent of circular economy and protein shift at the same time. So we are killing at least 2 birds with 1 stone. So we've been supported by the Flemish government and by the union. But the most important thing in every story is not the how or the what, it's the why. The why is crucial. We started with a shop on the farm 24 years ago, and consumers told me, look, your ice cream, we really like this flavor, it's great, your yogurt is very healthy, but we all heard the story of cows and global warming. So we started thinking, maybe we have to do something more to convince people that we do our best, not only to make healthy food that is very nutritious, but also try to decrease the impact. So we have to find ways to decrease, to collect or sequestrate carbon. And actually convincing consumers is important, but the exchange of knowledge between consumer and farmer is important to depolarize the debate, but also the exchange of knowledge between government, policymakers and consumers and farmers. American poet Robert Frost one day said, "The only way out is through." Now in our shop we try to convince customers that, we try to convince citizens that we will get through environmental problems together. And here in the picture you see a picture of citizens that have a citizens cooperative, and last year they helped us with financing additional photovoltaic power production, so we placed more solar panels. In the picture is not our solar panels, ours are on the roof of the shed for the cows. But here citizens helped farmers, so the exchange of knowledge between citizens and farmers is very important. And in the other picture you see there have been a lot of farmer strikes. First reason, food prices are low, which of course for a farmer is a problem. we've seen that food prices and increasing making food more expensive is a hot potato, and that poverty is a problem, because if you make food more precious, more expensive, it might be challenging for poor people. At the same time, you see more and more rules for farmers. So there is, in the farm to fork strategy, there are more limitations for farmers to just produce food. And actually, policymakers didn't always manage to tell farmers why. So the exchange of knowledge is very important, because if you can't tell people why, if you can't tell them that 3% of fallow, of at least 3% of non-productive land can have positive effects as well, if you can't tell them why there are limitations and how this can contribute to our challenge in the global warming, then it makes it even more difficult, of course. So the exchange of knowledge and depolarizing the debate is so crucial. Robert Frost just forgot one word. The only way out is through, together. And things we have to try. On our farm, we have been digging a pit. You see the pit here, because we also need nature-based solutions. And I think if we would have many, many, many pits in arable land, it can have an influence on the water holding system. So if we can slow down a little bit when there's heavy rainfall, heavy precipitation, and collect some of the water in the pits, there will be less pressure on the runoff, the downstream runoff in the water catchment. On a water catchment level, we can make a difference with many pits. But at the same time, by slowing down the runoff of water, it also means there's more seepage. So water has more time to penetrate in the soil through these pits. And if you can penetrate more water in the soil in winter, in spring, it means that your plants, your crop around the pit and in the field is growing better. And if the crop is growing better, the plants do photosynthesis. So you collect carbon, you break down CO2, and a part of the carbon will be sequestrated in the soil. So more carbon in the soil makes a soil that is more resilient and has a better water holding capacity. So we're even more resilient to droughts. So in theory, this is a good solution. Then, of course, we have to bring people together. For example, a linked farm is a cooperative between companies, farmers, and citizens. And working together creates more local chains, is a possibility to make food more valuable again and to help each other locally. And create better revenues for farmers on the farm, which can be interesting. And therefore, you have a situation where you can even work harder on the topic of healthy food. Now, of course, we face two problems. The first problem you see on the right, biodiversity. Really, we need more biodiversity. Maybe decades ago, some people thought, look, we're superior, we're humankind. If you see this picture, it should make you think that it's a risk. So we should care about the extinction of species. And another factor, of course, is a linear economy. Linear economy has its limits. We need more circularity, but that's very challenging. If you see in the food sector, it's remarkable because farms were the example of circularity. So actually, consumers have food in their kitchen, they bought it in a retailer, the retailer has been delivered by a distributor, has been a food manufacturer, food processor, there has been storage, and in the end it all came from the farmer's field. So every partner in the chain, of course, will take his profit. That's normal. In the end, it's just a small percentage of the money from the consumer going to the farmer. The farmer also receives subsidies from Common Agricultural Policy. In the end, a lot of this money goes to the supplying companies. So actually, EU is not subsidizing farmers, but is subsidizing supplying companies. So creating a more local food chain with circularity would close some loops and would actually help local food systems to work better. It would be logic, but it is more problematic for the supplying industry, of course, because if they would sell less products, yeah, there's a challenge there. Also, if we want to learn more without commercial interest, it's challenging as well, because commercial advisors have a lot of knowledge. And I think a solution there can be peer-to-peer learning. With peer-to-peer learning, because I experienced when you meet a farmer, they will tell you, look, I did this, it didn't work, and I did that, and it did work, and they just tell it to you because they have no commercial interest in this. So it is very interesting to have to do peer-to-peer learning, and we have to increase these networks and make them bigger. And the local cooperation also will ensure that we have more valuable food, because the value is in the food and not in the supplied products for the farmers. The farm-to-fork strategy actually is a great opportunity to connect citizens and farmers again. So here we see that there's a lot of innovation, and the farm-to-fork strategy actually gives a lot of new solutions and support to make a more green transition in the existing farming systems. Now we see that the young citizens of today, they will be the employees of the future, and companies are making CSR more and more important. So the corporate social responsibility is more important, and for the future employees, a nice CSR plan will be very important for them to make them willing to work for your company, and also to motivate them to stay longer in the same company. So farm to fork, through CSR, through young employees, will actually make supplying industry to farms realize that a long-term strategy is beneficial for them as well, and not always have to aim on a short-term strategy. So actually giving up on the very high ambition of the farm-to-fork strategy, in my opinion, is not beneficial to primary producers. In the short term, it might look like it is beneficial to production facilities that supply, but we need to find the solution together. And I think we all agree that we need some more agricultural biodiversity, so carbon farming would actually be a nice solution for policymakers, farmers, citizens, and companies. In carbon farming, you can implement more agricultural biodiversity. You invest in a more fertile soil. So these strategies are very important, and this way, of course, you do something for climate, but you also invest in the future of the farm. So it's good for the revenues of the farm. It is good for the image. It is good for local food chains. Carbon credits in the recent past have not proven to be very interesting revenue models for farmers yet. I must admit that. I have experienced that. At the same time, they still are a very important lever, because it makes farmers consider the opportunities of, should I start with carbon farming? Of course they should start with carbon farming, and I think there again peer-to-peer learning is very interesting again, because few farmers doing carbon farming, on the long term you will see the difference, and farmers will tell each other, okay, I did this, and actually all these measurements do not cost a lot of money. But we see when carbon in the soil starts increasing that, of course, this is much better. However, we will need innovation and technology. A sustainable food system without new technology, farms without new technology can hardly be sustainable. And we need to secure food production. Technology is important, but it is not in our benefit. We need more revenues, we need nature-based solutions, and we need peer-to-peer learning at the same time as technology. So I think here there is a good opportunity. Do not forget that, yeah, actually I have two take-home messages. So one is we have to get through together, and the second one is that if we give up on the high ambition of the farm to fork strategy, we give up on those who are farmer by nature.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll be discussing some more of those points in a little bit more detail in our panel discussion coming up in a moment. We've heard it a number of times over the last couple of days, and we also heard it in our opening speech this morning about the strategic dialogue for the future of EU agriculture. And we're lucky enough to have its chairman with us today, Professor Peter Stonschneider. And I would like to invite him up on stage to give us a few minutes explaining a little bit more about what it is and what you aim to do. Please give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
If I go into detail, it would be totally redundant to what is already said before. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here in this short intermediate in Leuven, and thanks to the Belgian presidency for this outstanding event. Just what I want to say is just, or what I want to present to you is the idea of the strategic dialogue initiated by the President of the European Commission, a, how to say, adventurous endeavor that has already its second plenary meeting behind on Monday and Tuesday this week. And it is a open, I can say, intense and already in a way productive discussion that we pursue on all those topics, on the political as well as on the practical level that the members of the strategic dialogue are working about or discussing. The work is already evolving. It has been an endeavor that came to the members at a very short notice. Most of the members do know since the mid of January that they are members of this endeavor. Nevertheless, we are already advancing. We are not only settled in a way, but we are already advancing towards conceptual consensuses which should be politically impactful in the end then. The strategic dialogue is a group of 29 individuals, I have to say, who are in a way representing the entire spectrum of the, I would say, the food network, not the food chain, but the food network throughout. I could use all these slides to illuminate this any further. Throughout the entire food network, farmers, of course, environmentalists, the food industry, retailers, consumers' representatives, academics, and so forth. And these 29 persons are mandated by the President of the Commission herself, but not as the representatives of their respective organizations, but as individuals who have the responsibility, but also the freedom to go on this journey looking for consensual concepts of future farming and food production and consuming styles in the European Union. We are on the journey for 6 weeks in a field, as you all know much better than I, that agricultural politics is more or less the most integrated policy area in the European in the European Union, and this has its own, how to say, tricky implications. The goal of the entire thing is, as the president put it, the goal is to reconcile, which is not an innocent word, of course, to reconcile farming and the preservation of nature. I quote from the mandate, "We need more dialogue and less polarization." Thank you for giving me this catchword of our goal. And what is as important as this dialogue and overcoming polarization is the president's emphasis that agriculture and protection of the natural world can go hand in hand. We need both, end quote. And I would phrase this in my ways, we need a political setting in which an agricultural gain is not an environmental loss, and environmental loss is not an agricultural gain. To get out of a categorically dilemmatic situation in agri-food and environmental politics. That is far from being unambitious, but nevertheless we are mandated, and we took the mandate. The time horizon of our debates is a midterm or long-term perspective, say 35 and so forth, but the time horizon of our work is quite squeezed. By the end of the summer, we should come up with recommendations that are, in the end, politically impactful. I've no doubt that we will come up with a final report. I'm a philologist, I can write on anything. But even those things I don't understand. But that is not the question. The question is do we achieve by drafting a final report that is really concrete enough, politically practicable and impactful, and thus impactful. And if we achieve this, this of course might be a contribution to the change of the play, because as we all know, the new commission is stepping in by autumn. We have the elections ahead of us, and this is the broader political context. The final report should be, organized around 4 questions which the mandate of the president has put on the table. One question, the first one, is about production, productivity, living conditions. The experts who spoke before me know that all much better and gave you already, a detailed overview on all these intricacies that we have to deal with. The second question is the ecosystem perspective. How can a reasonable farming system produce within the boundaries of our planet? The third section is on science, on innovation and technology, and the fourth is about competitiveness and the global dimension of a sustainable food system within Europe. I'm not at that stage at which I could tell you some of the first ideas or the perspectives to future prospects of a conceptual solution or overcoming of the dynamic situation we are in, but I may say that I'm really convinced that this is an endeavor that gives reasonable hope to the members and those who observe it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It sounds like you have your work cut out for you. A lot going on, but perhaps some of the recommendations coming from this food policy conference can also be a help in your discussions. I'm just going to put this onto our general thing so we don't have Chris's contacts on the screen all the time. And we're now going to have a short panel debate. We have half an hour. And while I invite our panelists up onto the stage, I'm going to tell you who's joining me. Please do come up on stage. And so we have Peter Schmidt, who is the president of the NAT section for Agriculture, Rural Development and the Environment at the European Economic Social Committee. Please have a seat. We have Els Bedart, who is Director of Product Policy and Sustainability at the umbrella organization representing the retail and wholesale sector, Eurocommerce. Welcome. Yes, you can sit wherever you want, but let's not leave spaces in between. Well, that's perfect. Then we have Lode Seysens, who is the president of the Flemish farmer representative organization Boerenbond and a member of Copa Cogeca. So obviously representing the farmers. And last but certainly not least, we have Catherine Geslan-Lanel, who is director at the European Commission's DG Agri. So we're going to start by hearing a little bit about what they think about connecting farmers and citizens and building a resilient food economy. And then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion between all of us. So give them a warm welcome. We've got microphones on here too, that you can pick up. So I would like to start with Peter, with you. We've heard a lot of introductory comments about and ideas and let's say pleas as to how we can go forward. From your point of view, from your committee's point of view, where are we and how should we be going forward to build this resilient economy and create this dialogue between farmers and citizens? I think you can just talk.
Just talk?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you very much at first for this kind invitation for this conference, and I see that a lot of players are here. So, and seriously taking your question would take hours, as Peter Strohschneider said. So, but let me focus on a couple of points which we as ESC think are for the utmost importance in order to reshape the food system. I say it clearly, reshape the food system. But allow me to say one sentence before to the ESC. That not everyone is probably familiar with the ESC. The ESC is an European body founded in the Roman treaties. And it is that important to know that we are united in three groups. We have employers, we have the trade unions, and we have the so-called civil society organizations like farmers, consumers. They are all in our committee. So the power of this committee is to find ways, proposals, compromises. And here we have really a capacity because we know how to organize common positions. So in the food sector, we have been the first one calling for a comprehensive food policy. So we made 2016 an opinion which says what we would need is having more an holistic view and a holistic approach across the food supply chain. So it doesn't make sense that we just split the food supply chain into the different sectors. And this is leading, and I refer now, allow me this not to skip, to stick too much on my points, listening to the previous speaker. So there was the wording polarization quite often. So, and exactly this split leads to this polarization, that we have polarized positions from the different parts of the food supply chain. And that's an issue. So where does this come from? This polarization, this comes from not having a cooperative approach, that we are cooperating with each other, so doing together, and we heard from the farmer, rather having a competition. And that's our problem. That means we have a competition which is built on not working together in order to deliver food for the society, but in the different parts, just working, making on their own part profit. And that's the problem. So that leads to this, that the weakest part in the food supply chain is do not get the fair share. If you go into details, we saw one slide from the farmer where's the money coming from, you know, from where the cart house was in, then we have to address where the money is in. So because in the food supply chain is enough money. If someone is telling us that you can't earn money in the food supply chain, this is wrong. One of the cheapest, the weakest parts in the food supply chain is the farmer and other workers in the food supply chain. But we have companies they make their money. And that's the big problem which we have and we have to address. Give you one example. In the food price crisis, when we had spiking prices. So I was quite surprised that almost no one talked about the real reason why we had the spiking prices. And we had it outside, discussed it. So it was because of food speculation. 4 big companies control more than 80% of the food commodity markets in the world. And don't tell me that this is something that we should not touch upon if we talk about a fair food system. So talking, and the question concretely, I could go into a lot of opinions. You find it online, what the ESC did about this. But if we want to bring in a food supply chain in a fair situation where the farmers are able, and also this we heard already, it is about having a fair price for the daily work what farmers are doing every day from the morning, not only from Monday to Friday, but also at the weekend, and longer than. And I'm a trade unionist. I know what I'm talking about when I talk with farmers. So we have our collective agreements as trade unions, and it's a regulated world, but not for farmers. And delivering during the different crises every day the food on our table. So how do we treat them? In Germany, we lose about 2,500 to 3,000 farmers every year. Every year. It's not that they don't want to go any longer for that. It is simply they're not able to survive. So, and bringing this aspect to the consumer is one point. And to tell the consumer that they have to pay a higher prices is another point. But our position, let me finalize here. I know that you are under time pressure, but I'm always the stress for moderators, I tell you. So, but the problem which we have here is that we can't solve social problems, poverty, and these things with food prices and with food policies. So that was the wrong approach in the Common Agriculture Policy over decades, saying, so we must have cheap food prices in order to solve problems in the social aspect. This is not what we can do. We see now the results. And we will face more protests of farmers if we do not really change the system significantly.
Thank you, Peter. And in fact, I mean, yesterday we've heard all the way through that the era of cheap food is over. However, I see a big problem in that having the dialogue between farmers and citizens, if citizens are suddenly going to have to pay huge amounts of increases on their food, that's not necessarily the way of creating a good rapport with farmers, let's put it that way. But I'd like to hear from Els, because obviously you're an important, the retailers and wholesalers are an important part in that chain, as we saw, and where's the money coming from and going to. So what's your position on this, about building this resilience in the food system and also creating this dialogue?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so we are Eurocommerce and the European Association for Retail and Wholesale. We gather all the big household names that you all meet when you go shopping every day or every week. I just want to underline the importance of the sector, because indeed we are at the other spectrum of the supply chain, so far away from the farmers, let's say. But we are in the economy very important. I mean, for food we have 9 million employees in the EU, so I think, and we have many millions of businesses. And of which also 99% is actually an SME, because a lot of the people see the big ones, but there are many, many small shops as well. Very diverse sector, with the bigger ones, with the supermarket, with the big hypermarkets, supermarkets, also the corner shops. So a very diverse picture, like also in the farming sector. We are an essential sector. We have referred to COVID several times already during the past days, and I think I need to refer to that again, because it really showed also the resilience of the whole supply chain, but especially of our sector, where we really worked in very difficult circumstances and made sure that people did continue to have access to food. So this is, I think we are essential. Don't forget we are essential. We are part and we are partner of all the other partners in the supply chain. We really need to talk about the system, and we have been talking about the system, luckily, and we need to bring in, and following Peter there, we cannot see agriculture separate from food. It is connected. We need to really, our role is that we sort of connect the production with the consumption. That's really what we are there for, our key role. We have the consumer there, who we don't have a contract with, by the way. But they really expect, they have a certain expectation on the quality of the food, on some ethical aspects of the food, price, of course, and it's been a very sensitive topic over the last months, but also convenience. Don't forget convenience. People need to have access, and it's also something very important for food security. So we are all in there together. What's grown on the farm doesn't automatically end up on the plate. There's a lot of added value in between, and I think what is important for us going forward, we, of course, are in daily contact with consumers, and we have a role indeed to understand, to explain where the food comes from and what the farmer plays on climate aspects. We do that every day. But we need to do this together. I mean, there is no other way around it. And so we are we're very happy with this dialogue as well. I think it is really the time to get out there and really sort of also base ourselves on facts, because like I was saying before, it's not really clear who is all part of this supply chain, what happens to the food. So I think the more transparency, and we have talked about it as well, the better for everybody, and the better we can actually market these products as well. And that is actually our hope. The more dialogue, and of course we have been very sad that we were expecting the framework, a legal framework. We need a legal framework for sustainable food systems to go further on this part of sustainability. There are many excellent examples of our retailers to working with farmers, to working with other actors in the supply chain. We have come to a stage where we need to make sure that we all face the same direction. What do we talk about when we talk about sustainable food? What are the definitions? What are the criteria? This can help actually consolidate and really build up some of the individual activities that are going up. But I think also really important for the farmer, we've heard financing. If you want to have an investment, you have to have some legal certainty where you are going, where the society and where the legislator wants you to go. We need this understanding. We need a good environment that we really move forward on the path that we have all already entered on. So that's my plea. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Els. I'd like to now go to, let's say, the farmer's perspective. And obviously we've heard that there are many different types of farmers, but so you're giving us the overall farmer's perspective. It's a very difficult position that you're in to try and create this dialogue between citizens and yourselves, and also make sure that the food supply system is resilient. Where do you go from here? Leuven.
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that instead it's a difficult job. People asked me the last few weeks when there were farmer protests, what do the farmers want? Because there was one journalist who visited the farmers' protest, and he went from one tractor to the other, and he said, they are all asking different kind of things. I said, yes, and those are only the Flemish farmers. Look at the total EU farmers, where you have total, very big differences in the farms, and the professor showed this on his first slide. And that's the typical kind of farming, because a farmer is farming on his farm, with the farm which can be a big one or a small one, which is specific soil. It can be an animal farming, can be vegetable farming, things like that. So all are very different, and that's the trouble we have at this moment, just to convince policy what the problems of farmers are. And I want to go on that with you. The first slide of the professor was, we are in a very uncertain world. And it was important to begin with that slide, because we should be convinced at this moment, when we are in an uncertain world, I should think food is very important. So it's okay that we have an open food conference here for 3 days. But for food, you need farmers. So we have to take care of our farmers in Europe. And do we have to forget about sustainability when we have to take care of our farmers? No. Absolutely not. On the strategic dialogue, environmental loss doesn't have to mean a cultural gain. I mean, we have to find the solutions together, as Chris said. So if you ask me, do we need a Green Deal? I say, yes, we need a Green Deal. We need ambitions in Europe to become more sustainable. Don't forget, our farmers are even more sustainable than the farmers in the rest of the world. We often forget about that, but to give an example, with 22 million cows in Europe, we produce the same amount of milk as in India with 122 million cows. Just to give you the comparison. So we do it better, but we can do it even better in the future, and our farmers want to do it better. So it's good that the European Union makes ambitions with goals, but a deal is a deal. And in my understanding of a deal is when all parties on the table are agreeing. And that's not the fact on the Green Deal. The Green Deal has emphasized too much on ambitions, raising the bar. But nobody seems to care how can we help our farmers to get over the bar. Thinking with the farmers, how can we go to these ambitions? And I think we need a rebalancing of the Green Deal. And we have to think together. As Chris said, we are in the problem together. We have to get out of it together. And we have to think more about enablers. Our sector can become much more circular than today. In Flanders, for example, we have renewal. We can have manure of animals. We can make it in a transition to a product which is totally equal to fertilizers. But it still is considered as manure because of legislative problems. So we have to emphasize on things like that. We have to make fair deals. It's not fair that we are asking our farmers to become more and more and more sustainable, and meanwhile making agreements all over the world and make agreements on which farmers have product standards which are the same, but production standards which are not the same at all. And at last, we have to ensure coherent policies. I want to say something about nature restoration law. Our farmers want to invest in biodiversity, but not in this way. At this moment, Europe is pushing the green button for a nature restoration law of which they didn't calculate what is the socio-economic impact on it. What will be the impact on our farmers? What will be the juridical impact on that? What will be the impact on licenses? So in that way, we are working in a wrong way. So there is work for the European Union, but there's also work for us as a sector. We have to go on working the way we did. We have, for example, in Flanders, we had we chose a forerunner for climate, and it was Chris, which was the forerunner for climate. We have to make examples of farmers who are doing well and encouraging their colleagues to do the same way. We have to invest in innovation, but for all of that, we need the help of legislation. We need the help of Europe. Thank you.
And so perfectly, we'll go straight over to Catherine from the European Commission. What do you think about what we've heard, and where do we go from here?
Well, thank you to the Belgian presidency for the invitation to this debate, which is very timely and very important, talking about resilience and the future of our EU, I would say not only farming system, but EU food system. In fact, the previous presentation introduction made my life easier because you've mentioned many of the key points I would like to highlight. First of all, in terms of resilience and sustainability, because you used both terms, I think that nobody argues against the fact that we need to, though we recognize that we've done a great job, the food chain has done a great job over the last couple of years when it comes to resilience, with COVID, the impact of the war in Ukraine. I don't need to further elaborate on this. And this is due to the efforts, the talents of all key players in the food chain. I can safely say also the existence also of the internal market, which is precious to our food security. And let me dare to say also EU public policies, in particular the common agricultural policies. But we need also not to be complacent. We know that our food systems have also vulnerabilities and risk that, by the way, we have worked on over the last couple of years, and in particular last year when we published this report on which we have engaged with stakeholders, including farmers, on the drivers to food security. We have vulnerabilities, and it's important to be aware of our vulnerabilities, the dependence on chemical inputs, the strong simplification, and there were good, and there are still good reasons for that, but the strong simplification of our farming system, the reduced diversity also of our farming system, the reduction of the number of farmers. Every 10 years we lose 25% of our farms, and we have an aging population. So we have a couple of, and it's not just about, of course, farmers, but it is important to recognize that they play a key role in the food chain. Also, on average, the farm income, which remains, though we've made progress on that. This was very visible on Alan Matthews' presentation, but we can see that we are not there yet for many farmers. So basically, we have a number of vulnerabilities, and we need to engage on that and work together to see. We're not going to fix everything, but what is the most important? What are the priorities so that we can, in 20 years, in 10 years, continue to celebrate the fact that we, as Europeans, are able to continue to produce most of our food which is healthy, nutritious, affordable, and that preserve our environment, our climate, and makes also helps the key players of the food chain to make a livelihood, in particular farmers. Agriculture has become probably riskier than it has ever been. Price volatility has always been there. The importance of weather, of course, is always important, but now we've seen that there are more than this. The risk of the transition also, changing your practices, your farming systems, production system, is also bringing risks that we need to look at. So here, I think that's the first point. The second one, which makes also the work on making our farming and food system more sustainable and resilient is the complexity of the food chain and the fact that you have many key players. And we cannot, and that's maybe where we would need to do a better job, is that we can't ask farmers to change what they produce, how they produce it, without having an approach which is across the food chain. Does it serve the purpose to say to farmers, because we need to eat less animal proteins? Does it serve the purpose to tell them to reduce animal production when we as consumers continue basically to eat the same amount of meat? I mean, it decreased, but it's very slow. So basically it means that we need to work at all levels of the food chain, and that may be something that we have not done sufficiently in an enough thorough manner. And that's where, in particular, not only, but in particular, the strategic dialogue helps to bring, more understanding, of the interest, the difficulties, the intricacies of the food chain. And as I said, the fact that farmers in isolation cannot deliver more sustainable, more resilient system without working with consumers, demand, with retailers, with the food industry. That's my first point. The second would be we need also to make sure that farmers can make a fair living with their activity, because if it doesn't happen, obviously, if we don't make progress here, and there are many sources of remuneration, I'm not only thinking about public funding, which of course is important, but we need to make sure that the market and maybe other new ways of remunerating, the services that farmers render need to be also considered, because that's important. So these are some of the key questions on which we are working, as I said, in the context of the strategic dialogue, and we have a lot of expectation. And it's not the Commission, preparing the report, obviously. This will be this core group under the leadership of Professor Schneider. But we are keeping an eye, and we look forward to the outcome of that, where we will hopefully deliver also maybe some shared understanding of what is at stake, how we can work together, and recommendation not just for policymakers, they are important, I cannot say anything else, but also for each key player in the food chain. The solution exists, they are there. I don't think that we are lacking solution, though of course we need knowledge, innovation, research, but solution already exists. The key question that we have to work together on is how do we scale up this solution? And I'm saying that because we've seen, Chris presented some of this solution, So the question is, how do we move? I would say we have 30% of our farmers doing a fantastic job. We have 100% of our farmers doing a fantastic job. Yeah, I need to be careful there. However, I think that 30% of the farmers have already in the European Union started to make significant progress when it comes to more resilience and more sustainability. The others may have started, but they are struggling also for many reasons that I mentioned.
Yes.
So how can we make sure that the other 70% will join the travel, and the direction of the travel was very well described by my.
Could you pass the microphone on, because I'd like to hear your opinion on that question as to how we can go further and faster, and also involve the 70% as well. I know you have to go, so I'm going to try and wrap up this debate. And also just a quick question on peer-to-peer learning that we heard. What as an organisation are you doing to help that process happen? Because it seems like it's very valuable for farmers to also learn from each other.
Well, starting with the last thing, we are investing a lot of it. For example, we developed a climate scan. We developed a climate scan together with ILVO, the Institute for Research in Agriculture in Flanders. We developed the climate scan, and we had a big conclusion in that. Big conclusion we started with the production of milk, and we had a conclusion that the carbon footprint of milk, as I showed I mentioned before, is better in Europe than it's in the rest of the world. And as I can say it together as president of the Flanders Union, the best results were in Flanders. Thanks, of course, to Chris and his colleagues. But we didn't use that scan only to say we are the best in the world. No, we are going to use that scan at this moment to offer it to the dairy farmers to compare their results. To say, why are you doing better than I am? What are you doing? What are you doing that I'm not doing? And maybe I can do it also. So in that way, we can encourage a lot of farmers to go further. And that's a very big challenge for us. Also investigating in things which are doing better. For example, we are investigating this moment in a spin-off which is developing biological pesticides. So we need alternatives. But as I said, we also need legislation, because sometimes we have techniques, and the techniques are there, but we don't have the legislative initiative that follows. For example, Renew, we can go further on that in Flanders. We can replace the fertilizers. Fertilizers, the carbon footprint of a fertilizer, that's a disaster. We can do it better in Flanders, and we are not allowed to replace those fertilizers by Renew. And that's something which is bothering. We should emphasize on those things, and then I'm convinced already 100% of our farmers are doing a very good job, but they will do better in the future. I'm convinced of that. But we need the help of the policy, and we need to do it together.
Thank you. Coming to you a second, Peter, I want to ask you about food policy councils. Well, what role have they got? I know you have to go. If you have to leave us, Feel free, though, I would prefer you not to, but if you have to, I do understand. We did start late, after all.
Yeah, that's indeed one of our proposals, which we proposed already a couple of years ago, and we tried to chase the Commission to establish Food Policy Council, a European Food Policy Council, but we're also calling for national, regional, local food policy councils, because we think if we talk about the together, if we talk about the cooperation, this is a way how you can start this cooperation, and the strategic dialogues are a good example to do this, in order to get an understanding for the different players in the market and to shape the food system. The different food systems, we do not have one food system, no? We have different systems. So, and to help and to make the connection from the consumer, that's the original question, with the farmers, with the retailers, with the farmers, with the processors, with the farmers. But allow me address again one of the key problems which we have. So it means if we have, for instance, multinationals, they are totally disconnected from within the food supply chain, from farmers, from consumers. They don't have any contact. The only thing what they do is money making. So, and they give pressure to the farmers, and how they can be sustainable if they are coming and telling the farmers, look, I do not need, and this is a question also for biodiversity, and that's the truth, because I've been working with the multinationals for years. They introduce programs saying, when we produce a pizza, we do not need 10 different tomatoes or 10 different onion sorts. So they say, you deliver the tomato in this shape and in this sort. And then the farmers are forced to do it and to reduce biodiversity. So here, the same as you are saying, we need legislation also in order to protect and help the farmers and the food supply chain, but also to give a frame that all this greed, which we have in this, should be really, in a way, regulated, that not a couple of companies are grabbing the money and for the rest is not enough. Sorry to say that again. This is of the utmost importance, and I know that the Commission doesn't like that because we have a kind of market belief still in Europe. The market doesn't solve our problems. Only policymakers, together with all participants, are able to solve it. That's why the law and the farm to fork was absolutely the right approach to do it. So we were fully supportive for this. And it shows how difficult it is. For the farmers, we had obligations, the objectives. So we can discuss that, know how to get there. But for the processing sector, there was a voluntary code of conduct. The farmers were forced to do it, and the industry, they could say, we make our pledges. No? So, and that's one of our key problems. But one of the solutions is indeed food policy councils.
Thank you. Catherine, I see you wanted to jump in there a second, and also, obviously, Else, we need to hear from you too.
Yeah, just to say that we are aware that we have an issue with the position of the farmers in the food chain. So we've said we have 9 million farmers, and we have a more concentrated downstream, system in the food chain. So basically, when it comes to the food industry, though we have a lot of food companies still in Europe, and retailers and customers and so on and so forth. So basically, we have already, both at national level, but here I would say at EU level, provided a set of I would say tools, both in the CAP and in the Unfair Trade Practices Directive, so in the legislation, to try to see how we can help to strengthen the position of farmers in the food chain, so give them a better bargaining power, So I would mention in the Common Market Organization, you have the ability for farmers, and they are using that, though a better job can be done, but they have not necessarily everywhere in all sectors and in all member states used that possibility to have more producers' organization, cooperatives, to reinforce the bargaining powers of the farmers. We are at the moment considering, reviewing also our policies on that, in particular because also this was, as we understand it, one of the key elements in the recent protest of the farmers, the question of the remuneration. So how can you address that? You need also you cannot just reply with public funding, that's not reasonable. You need to make sure that the market would better reward the work of the farmers. So we are evaluating the directive, how the directive on unfair trade practices has been implemented in the member states, and whether there are still hurdles, obstacles, and whether we can strengthen that approach. We are also ready to consider how we can give a boost to, the common market organizations in relation with producers' organizations and so on and so forth, and maybe also provide more transparency in the food chain on price, cost, margin. So these are issues that we are looking at.
And talking about transparency and price, cost, margins, else just a quick thing, we really need to wrap it up. So a sort of summary of a reaction to what you've already heard, particularly regarding perfect tomatoes and all this kind of thing.
No, I just want to come back on the training and the support. As I said, it is for us, it's key to connect the production with the consumption, and that of course has a part of training and capacity building with farmers. And I think we have plenty of examples where indeed there are dedicated supply chains where our members work with their often very local farms to make sure they really produce according to what the market wants. These are things that I think we really need to look at critically and to see indeed how we can upscale them. But that is happening throughout. And then my other point would be that, and then following on from the local food policies, don't forget that we are really very much locally embedded as well in cities and villages, and we need to be part as a sector. We want to be part as a sector to talk about food policy. And I think this is really within the framework of what European bigger action, but yeah, locally this is also where the action happens. This is where the relation, where the partnerships develop. So we are very much open for that and very eager to work on each other's strengths as well going forward.
Yes, of course, you play a pivotal role between the producers and the consumers in the end. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to bring this to a close, but I think it's been a very interesting discussion. We've, of course, only scratched the surface, as is only possible in the short time that we have. But, of course, debates are continuing throughout the day. There's going to be a 30-minute break now until 11 o'clock. There are thematic sessions then covering One Health, very important, food and health, African and European food systems, and local food strategies for food system transformation. You can check the screens out to find out where each session is in which room. But for now, I'd like you to thank our panelists and the people that we heard at the beginning for a fantastic start to the day. Thank you very much indeed.